Hey everyone. That was the perfect time to announce the creation of that foundation because I am about to give that foundation a nice to-do list, I think. Yeah. So my name's Aaron. I work at Carbon 5 as a software developer. Hannah and Anna told you guys about Carbon 5 already, so I will spare you that. I do want to say a quick thanks to Carbon 5 for helping to beta test this talk because it would not be quite as good if not for their helpful feedback earlier this week. This is going to be a really full talk. I thought it'd be hard to fill 20 minutes, and it turns out it's not at all hard for me to fill 20 minutes of complaining. So there won't be time for questions afterwards, but please feel free to hit me up during the breaks, or if you are more introverted, you can hit me up on Twitter or Mastodon, and I'll put this slide up at the end too. Also, so as you might guess from the title, I'm going to be kind of talking about things that I wish Elixir had or that it did. And so it's really easy to complain about things. Like I don't know, maybe I'm just really skilled at it, but like it's easy for me to complain about stuff. So I want to kind of like start with a little bit of background and some disclaimers here. So my background is going to influence the way that I see Elixir and the things I need from Elixir. So my background is I'm a longtime web developer, mostly working with Ruby. I've touched on some other technologies as well, and my love for Ruby heavily influences the way I think about Elixir. I have personally been using Elixir for work for about half a year now, so I'm still pretty new to it, but I've dove into it enough that I can, I feel like I have a decent understanding of it. I'd probably have a better understanding of it in like another year or so, but I think it's kind of a nice level perspective right now. And I think most importantly, also I'm not an expert on systems, and I think the most important thing to keep in mind here is that the Elixir community does fantastic work, and they do it all for free. They give us Elixir for free. They don't owe me anything. They don't owe you anything. I'm going to share some of my wishes, but like they're just my opinions. So please keep that in mind. I've known about Elixir for a few years now, and I feel like I've kind of read the same introductory blog posts like about 100 times, and it always has a lot of the same talking points that you've probably heard a bunch of times before. So let's hear them once more, shall we? So Elixir takes Erlang, which is like this really powerful engine, but it's sitting inside of this old rusted out car that no one wants to drive anymore, and it takes that engine and it puts it into a nice shiny sports car that has Ruby-like syntax. And it has different characteristics from Ruby. It's not object-oriented. It's functional instead. It's got very high concurrency because it uses these processes that we've learned about earlier today. They're nice and lightweight. And these processes can talk to each other on the same node or on multiple nodes. It doesn't care. You can't have too many nodes. Like, you don't want to have more than 100 or 1,000. Like, that would get complicated. But you can have multiple nodes, and that's fine. And because of these characteristics, Elixir offers fault tolerance. And I think one of the most interesting things to me is that ability to kind of build a distributed system that has that fault tolerance. And you can do cool things with that, like hot code deploys. And you can live debug apps so that they can be up for maybe even years at a time. All those things are music to my ears, having tried to scale systems in other languages. And when I actually got to dive into using Elixir for writing code, I did, in fact, find it quite pleasant, as I imagine you have as well. It's a great language to use. Like, it's got a very declarative nature to it. I love the pattern matching stuff. I think that Elixir is great to use in distributed systems for like situations where you need to reach out to another networked computer to do something. Like, that's an error-prone operation. And Elixir doesn't deal with exceptions too much. Like, you have them, but the more common way to deal with things in Elixir is to kind of roll with the punches. And if something goes wrong, you can gracefully handle those errors. And finally, I really like that metaprogramming is kind of supported from the ground up in Elixir. Is actually one of the reasons that Jose created the language. And like, how well does Elixir support metaprogramming? Well, like most of Elixir is more Elixir. And I think we're going to be hearing more about that later today. And I think that's really exciting. I love that internal consistency. Elixir takes documentation really seriously, and I think that's really useful as a newcomer to the language. It stays useful as you get to know a language better, because you're always going to need to look things up. And Elixir has done a fantastic job of creating this culture of good documentation. The documentation is always beautiful when it's using like xdoc. You can access it from inside of IEX. Like, it's really great, and that's a great resource for a language to have. And overall, like, I really like Elixir as a language. I have some language-specific nitpicks, but I think I kind of want to focus on some of the most bold claims that people make about Elixir in the rest of this talk, and those bold claims are like your ability to create these big, scalable, distributed, and fault-tolerant systems easily with Elixir. As we know, Elixir works a little bit differently than like a system like Rails. If you want to use a Rails server, like one Rails server can serve a single request at a time. So if you want to scale that, you make multiple copies of the same server and you run them at the same time and you put them behind a load balancer. Elixir has these lightweight processes, and you can have each of those processes process a request at once, which allows you to process many concurrently, and you can do it a lot more easily with a single server than you otherwise might be able to. The processes can have state, which is nice. If you want to do some like really simple caching of stuff in memory, you can do that without having to like make a round trip to an external system like Memcache or Redis, and that can be really nice, especially if like speed's important to you. And finally, like you can spin up other processes so easily. So that's great if you're used to how Rails does background jobs, which is to have a completely separate worker. You have a separate queuing system. It's kind of cumbersome. Like if you wanted to have a web app where someone uploaded their avatar and you wanted to resize that avatar and upload it to a CDN, it's a little bit cumbersome in Rails. Like the tools make it easy, but like under the hood it's cumbersome. But you could do something similar in Elixir and it'd be fairly simple because you're just going to spin up a process, have it do that, and then the process will be done. But one of the things I think is really interesting about Elixir is OTP. OTP traditionally stood for Open Telecom Platform because it was used for writing telephone switches and other communication systems. Nowadays, it's used for more general purpose things, so it just stands for OTP. And it does a really good job of abstracting the boring minutia of building these applications. You've got the ability to do things like process communication, and OTP provides really nice abstractions that make it easy to spin up a process and send messages to it and handle all the boring stuff like what happens when things go down. You have your supervisors and you have all those kinds of things. If you wanted to kind of build this on your own, that would be kind of cumbersome. And if you want to build a process communication system on your own where the processes could communicate with each other even if they're on a completely different machine in another part of the world, like that'd be a huge pain in the ass. So I'm really glad that these abstractions exist because those are great tools to build your distributed system with to start with. And I think it's really cool that OTP also provides you with the ability to do things like hot reload and upgrade code in your system. And I think OTP is a really fantastic set of APIs, but as a newcomer to it, definitely as I was learning the Elixir language, the first time I saw some OTP things, it definitely looked a little bit unfamiliar. Let me show you like a gen server, for instance. This is a really simple one. It just wraps an integer, and you can send this process messages, and it will increment the integer. But like having just like seen some of the simpler Elixir things like the pattern matching and stuff like that, like this looks very different. It doesn't even necessarily feel like I'm doing Elixir at all. Like it is definitely Elixir code, but like this is like from a different culture. And it is, it's from Erlang. And you can really kind of see the Erlang showing here. Like if you want to see what I mean here, here is the same gen server written in Erlang. And if you look, it's like line for line the exact same logic and code. It's a very strange kind of API. To a newcomer. Like you're doing weird things like you're applying, you're returning from these functions with these tuples that have very specific values in them. You're repeating that state variable for some reason. I don't know what the deal is there. Well, I do, but like as a beginner, I didn't know, and it was weird looking. I think that it's fine that Elixir kind of has started off by like leveraging OTP wholesale and just kind of having the exact same APIs, but I would really like to see something that better abstracts this. I think that there could be a nice Elixir native way to do this in a way that's simple and doesn't necessarily look like this. I don't know what that would necessarily look like, but I have to think that there's a way to do it a little bit more simply than this. And to actually like use OTP, I hear of a lot of people using Elixir in production. I hear many of you people are doing that, and that's really exciting. But as I talk to a lot of people building these production systems, people are using OTP, but I think a lot of them are using it incidentally. Like you might be deploying a Phoenix application, and that Phoenix application uses gen servers, for instance, to do its thing, and it's using supervised processes, but you're not really taking full advantage of all that OTP has to offer. So maybe you've got these application servers up, but your state is actually in a database somewhere that's external, like you're using Postgres or Redis. And if you really want to go whole hog with OTP, like the traditional way that's been done is you've got these supervised processes and you've got lots of them and they store their state in memory. And the whole system as a whole is resilient because of the fact that you have all this extra infrastructure to help supervise those processes. And that's really cool. But like this idea of like in-memory state is really terrifying because like in-memory is like where things can go wrong if your server just dies. And people always say it's okay, we got ways to deal with this in Erlang. But actually doing that in practice, I feel like I'm not really fully equipped to do that. And I'm kind of terrified at the concept of just having all my state in memory. I worry about situations like a server going down catastrophically, like losing power, or just having a capacitor blow or something like that. That could happen. And the solution to that is you have redundancy. You build multiple nodes. And let's talk about that a little bit, because we do talk about how it's really easy to actually go from one node to many nodes with Elixir, and you can see how easy it is. It's just a few lines of code. But to actually go from that communicating across nodes to an actual real distributed system that you can run in production and have real customers using it, there's a huge gap between those two things. And that is really kind of getting at the heart of where I find myself feeling ill-equipped to actually put Elixir in production right now. And as I was researching for the talk, I know that there's this history of Erlang developers who have a lot of institutional knowledge of doing this stuff. So I kind of looked around to see maybe Erlang actually has these tools, and if I just know the right APIs, a lot of these things might be abstracted away in a simpler way. And I was looking at this book, Designing for Scalability with Erlang and OTP, and I found the chapter that seemed like it was going to be perfect for me. It was called Systems That Never Stop. It's a little bit later in the book, and I was kind of reading through, and there wasn't really any actual Erlang code in this chapter. It was mostly just describing how to put together the system, and it's all really good advice, and I took it to heart. But I was okay, where are the actual APIs that do this for me? And then I kind of found this snippet here, which is basically just telling me that Erlang does not provide me these tools out of the box. They just give me the ability that I could build these tools myself. And I read that, I'm just well, shit. I really wanted that. I wanted to be able to build a distributed system and have tools that can just give me a lot of that out of the box. And I'm sure there are probably some hardcore Erlang people out there in the audience right now that are kind of shaking their heads oh man, these lazy millennials, they just kind of want a whole distributed system without having to do any work. And I know that makes me sound lazy and entitled and unambitious, and I'm all those things. But I think it's more important than that. I think we might be overselling Elixir just a little bit on how easy it is to actually get from a small system to a really large distributed system. And I think that we are at a point now, it's 2019, we can do better things here. We can start to take some of these best practices that we know are there, because we have really good materials that talk about what your system needs to do to be resilient. And I think we can start to take some of those patterns and actually turn them into better tools. And that's really what I kind of want to see. We got this popular saying let it crash, and that's a really good catchphrase. It sounds really good, but there's actually kind of a second part to that, which is I think really important, and that is to basically say that when it does crash, it loses its state in its mailbox messages, and if those had important things in them, then well, those are gone. And I guess we just don't say that one because it doesn't sound as catchy. Let it crash is a little punchier, but it's true. And there are ways that you can mitigate this, and there are always good design patterns. But the devil is in these details. And the books are good at speaking in generalities about these details, and there's lots of good blog posts about these generalities. But to actually build one of these systems, you're kind of just told to do that yourself. It's kind of left as an exercise to the reader to actually implement this system with these patterns. And that's a hell of a big exercise. And every system is different. Every system is going to have its own specific needs, and those will feed into the different decisions you're going to make for how you're going to let things fail and how you're going to degrade. But our systems are not all completely special snowflakes. We are doing a lot of common things, and we have identified common things in web development before, and we've abstracted them, and we've built tools that make them much easier than they used to be. And I think we can do it again. So there are some things that I'd like to see, and I'm going to go through a couple different examples here for some stuff that I'd like to see in maybe OTP or just some general libraries that I wish Elixir had that would start to kind of go in this direction of making things a little bit easier for developers. Here's a really simple one, and this is low-hanging fruit. I could probably write this if I wasn't busy writing talks complaining about how we don't have these things. What if we have agents? Those are a really cool thing in Elixir, and if you're not familiar with an agent, it's a process that wraps around a piece of state. So you can spin one up really easily. You can grab the state, you can update it if you want to, and that's really nice. What if we had agents that were wrapped around specific kinds of data structures? Maps are a common one. We use them all the time. I think it'd be really nice if we had a map agent. And it would be, in this case, like you just spin one up the way you'd spin up any agent, but it would expose an API that's basically the same as the map module in Elixir, and you can just make modifications to this map that's wrapped in this process. And that would be really convenient, right? And I think it would get people used to the idea that you can actually like have these processes that have state that you can modify by sending messages to it. And it wouldn't be like the exact same API that maps use, because like the map module itself is dealing with immutable maps, and like these wrappers kind of give you the pseudo mutability of state because you're sending messages to it. But I think that'd be really nice. And I think like as a web developer, there are lots of different data structures I would be really happy to have in the form of like these wrap things that I don't want to have to build myself. And I could build it myself. I totally could. But I build a lot of things myself, but I don't, because I want to be writing things that add value for people. To get a little bit more complicated here, I've mentioned the multi-node thing, because being able to run Elixir in multiple nodes is where you actually get resiliency, and you can get the real fault tolerance. Because if you're in one node, which I know some people are still, like that node can go down and you may have lost a lot unless you're keeping your data in other places. So I think last year Daniel Azuma gave a really good talk at ElixirConf 2018 about how he basically built a distributed agent, which was an agent that it existed in multiple nodes, and that made it possible for him to have a Kubernetes cluster that you could take down one of the nodes, and then the state was still in one of the other nodes, so people could have a game state that was active and didn't miss a beat just because a node went down. I would like this, because like the procedure he went through to do that involved a bunch of different libraries that aren't that well supported, and he kind of like duct taped it all together. It's really cool. Like we have the core tools here. You can use something called a CRDT, or a conflict-free, a conflict-free replicated data type. And there are libraries in Elixir for that. They're not super well documented. And like I can have multiple nodes in a cluster. Like there's libcluster for that. But like there's nothing that like actually puts it all together for me. Like I want something that just gives me a start link that can like basically start me up a cluster of things and give me a distributed agent where if one of those nodes goes down, it's okay because it'll just recover immediately. And I'm only really interacting with one node in this case. Like this is just a simple pattern where I just want to have some redundancy. But like if one goes down, I can actually handle that. And that would be great. Like if I had things like this that were basically free, I could build much more complicated distributed systems with confidence and not worry about like having to learn about these things the hard way. That's really cool. Like I think that's something that we should strive to have. So like having used Elixir for a little bit, I've kind of developed my own kind of dream for like what it becomes. And what I want to see is, I want to see Elixir abstract things more, and I want to see Elixir making distributed systems really easy. When it comes to web development, like it wasn't very long ago when it was really difficult to build web apps. And to build a web app, you had to do a lot of things yourself. Like you had to do authentication yourself. You had to interact with a database by yourself, and you had to make sure you sanitized your input so you didn't have a Bobby table situation happen. And we don't have to do that sort of thing anymore because we have really good tools that make it better. I can now spin up a Rails app, and I can use Devise with it, for instance, and I can have authentication. And that authentication system will protect user password data in a way that's better than some rinky-dink corporation like Sony in 2011 with the PSN network. And like, I can do that not because I'm like 100 times better of a web developer than people were in the 90s. I can do it because there are tools that amplify my skills. And we are kind of in that place right now with distributed systems that I think we were in the 90s with web development. It's very much in its infancy. We kind of know the right things to do, but I think that there exist things that we can do to make that simpler. And I think we need to start being more opinionated about how we build these distributed systems and start thinking of a few good patterns and build some really good tools around them. I think of a good programming language as being kind of like a really nice set of stairs that gets you to the top of a hill. And right now, when I want to use Elixir, I see those bottom stairs, and I can climb up them really well, because Elixir is a very welcoming community, and they have really fantastic tools to let me do these things. But eventually, I get to a certain point where I can kind of see that there are some stairs missing, and if I want to scale my application, I've got a wall that I need to scale up to get past those skipped steps. And once I climb that, I can then kind of keep moving on, but I would like us as a community to start filling in those missing stairs and get it to the point where I can actually start like as one person shop, build my application, and as my needs grow, like every step of the way is a nice gradual step that kind of gets me a little bit higher. And I can stop whenever I want if I get to a certain point and I'm happy, but if I want more, I can get more. Like I think of all the different businesses that exist now because of frameworks like Rails and Django. And they just couldn't have existed before because the companies just wouldn't have been able to get off the ground because they wouldn't have had the person power they needed. But now they can. And I really like the idea of thinking about how we can use Elixir as a way to kind of get there. Right now, I think if you want to use Elixir and you are comparing it to like Go or some other languages, like they're about on par with each other in terms of like how long it takes you to build one of these systems. But I truly think that Elixir has the raw ingredients where we could actually make it 10 times more easy to build a distributed system with Elixir as opposed to something else. And I really hope that we can see that in the next few years. And I can't wait to see what we build with it. Thank you.